Hi, everybody, and welcome to Good Vibes FC. I'm Sam Lewis, and I am coming to you from the Women's Game World Headquarters in Vermont.
And I'm Becky Sauerbrunn, coming to you from Portland, Oregon.
Reba, it was Labor Day weekend this past weekend.
Was it?
Yeah, it was. Do you say that because you didn't get to celebrate?
Absolutely not. I was a full training day with meetings and everything.
Oh, my goodness. So soccer players apparently do not get Labor Day. I had a family lobster bake on Sunday.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah, it was pretty fun, actually. We went to Pat's family's house. His parents bought 40 lobsters, and they were just boiled them in these big pots outside, over a flame. And then I'm not great at breaking down lobsters. Do you know how to break down a lobster?
No
it's
idea.
Pretty hard. So I just sat next to Pat like a little scavenger and made him feed me little bits of meat.
I can totally see that too.
Yeah, I kept being okay, more. But it was actually really, really good. We had some corn. We had lobster. There was some potatoes. There was pasta salad, which everybody knows that I love. They made some hamburgers and hot dogs for the folks that are not interested in lobster. But no hamburgers, hot dogs for Becky this weekend. It was just a normal soccer weekend.
Just a normal soccer weekend. Yeah, just a training day as normal.
Wow, that's
how it is.
This actually brings me to my next question. In terms of a year, is Labor Day weekend the Sunday Scaries? Because summer's over.
Oh, that's for people that fear the end of summer, probably. But I'm kind of bring on the fall. I mean, we've talked about this before.
I know. And I knew you were going to say that. I literally was Becky is going to say no. Labor Day weekend is my Friday night.
It is a harbinger of good.
Yeah. It's oh my God, the best is ahead. That is really, really funny. Okay, well, happy Labor Day weekend, everybody. I hope that you all had lobsters, hamburgers, hot dogs, no Sunday scaries. Because today on the podcast, we're talking all things NWSL. The playoff race is on. We're going to have a look at the run-in. We're only 8 weeks from playoffs, which is crazy. Then I'm really excited today because we are going to be joined by NWSLPA President Tori Huster to get a deep dive into the new CBA. Then we have a question about how we would prove to each other that we aren't clones.
God, I love that question.
I know. I've been really on the hunt lately for the craziest, weirdest questions that I can find. So this is a plug to send me quirky questions, everybody. I'm picking the weird ones. Please send them in. Email me, womensgamemib@menandblazers.com, and we will try to ask Becky and Lynn on the podcast. Thank you so much. Okay, so like I said, somehow already the race for the playoffs is on. Just 8 matches remain to see who is going to take home the NWSL Shield. Or perhaps the real question here is, can anybody pry the NWSL Shield from Barbara Banda and Orlando's fingers as they rage on? Kansas City dropped points again, so Orlando is just getting further and further up the table. Let's get into this, Becky. So 4 teams are on 2-game win streaks since the return of the Olympics. First up, again, no surprise here, it's Orlando, who are actually on a 19-game unbeaten streak, which is an NWSL record.
That is wild.
It's so wild. But they've also won their first 2 games back since the Olympics. Then there are 3 other teams on these 2-game win streaks. And those ones are a little bit more surprising. We have Angel City have won their first 2 games back since the Olympics, Utah Royals, and Seattle Reign. So that's 9th place, 11th place, and now the 13th place teams in the NWSL. Teams like this, like Seattle and Utah, who could barely find a win in the first part of the season, what are they doing right now? These first 2 games back, has something changed? What's going right for them?
Well, I think you can look at the work that they did during the break. Were they finding momentum? Did they pick up players? And are they just kind of finding their groove? I feel like you just find a way to win. And sometimes you do that from the jump of a season. And sometimes it takes a while. It could take half a season, 3/4 of a season. And you kind of go on this run. You just can't wait till it's too late. You got to kind of find it early enough that you can really make a playoff push. But I feel like there are little things that teams can do that just the ball starts bouncing their way. Also, if you start executing smaller things really well, like set pieces, I think Seattle has started to do that really well. And so, yeah, you just kind of find that groove and just try to stay in it.
Yeah, well, this is the theme of this whole section of the podcast, really, is these streaks and this momentum and feeling good. You mentioned like the momentum teams may have built over that summer series. I know that Utah won their group in that series. They also signed a couple of players. So maybe Utah is like finding it, figuring out they had a great win this weekend. I saw one of their goals was really great. It like took such good advantage of a counterattack opportunity. There was a beautiful long ball over the top to Paige Monahan, and she finished it. And it just feels like something's clicking there in Utah. And like you said, same with Seattle. Ji So-yeon scored an awesome free kick goal. Sophia Huerta buried her penalty kick. And Seattle, again, just kind of figuring it out. We're going to get more to like what it feels like to be on a streak like this, to have momentum, what qualifies a streak. But we do have to mention first, there are a couple of 2-game losing streaks. Second place, Kansas City, lost a couple games in a row. Sorry, Becky. 6th place, Portland Thorns have lost a couple games in a row. But that's not new to you guys. You've done it. You figured it out earlier this year. 7th place, Chicago Red Stars. And then our new last place team in 14th, the Houston Dash, have lost a couple of games in a row. So before we get into Portland, Becky, we're talking a lot about streaks, win streaks, losing streaks. As a player, do you feel that? Is there real momentum in winning multiple games in a row or losing multiple games in a row? And how does it affect the way you go into the next match?
Yeah, I would say when you're on a win streak and those feel amazing, there's just like this collective belief that you're going to find a way to win the match because you've already done it several games before. So why should this be any different? And so even if the ball doesn't really bounce your way at first, it's still like, no, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And I do think that there is like a collective will and strength and that will to push your team over the line that is like tangible. I will say though, like that teams on win streaks, like Rob Gale, our Portland coach, calls winning basically deodorant. Like you paper over the cracks. So you have to be really careful that you're still being very diligent in the game reviews and all those things, because we know in this league, a win can become a loss like very quickly.
Wait, I need to know more about this. He calls winning deodorant, meaning like you can win a game but not play well. Like you still stink. Your armpits still stink. So you have to be careful to, in this metaphor, shower and wash your armpits really well?
Yeah, like just you have to stay diligent with your hygiene if you want to keep smelling good.
I'm dead. Okay, that makes so much sense. How does a losing streak feel? Like you guys have lost 2 in a row, but you had a rocky start at the beginning of the season too, and now you're in a much better position. You're obviously in the playoff race. How does it feel to kind of have a losing streak, if this qualifies as one, and how do you address this?
Yeah, I would say when you're on a losing streak that it's really based on the feel of the games, because you could be on a losing streak, but you're so close to finding the way to make it all work out. Or you could be on a losing streak where you're committing the same mistakes and these patterns keep repeating, or the attitudes are bad on the field. And so the way you address a losing streak is really based off, why are you losing? And if, for me, with Portland at the beginning of the season, the feeling of those losses were the competitiveness, the energy, the pride, the fight. And so those are issues that you have to then very specifically direct, because those are things that you need to be working on in training, in the meetings. Like that's something that needs to be addressed from the top down of the entire organization, and people need to be held accountable. So like there's all these layers to it, but sometimes you're losing games and you're just doing everything right and the ball just does not bounce your way.
So it kind of sounds like there's like good losing and bad losing.
I think all losing is bad, but there's like less terrible losing and more terrible losing.
And it's a difference in feeling. Like you can play really well, execute your game plan, and lose, and it almost is less terrible. Well, it's not almost. That is less terrible than if your team is lacking competitiveness and lacking energy and lacking focus. Like there are losses that wouldn't happen again, and then there are losses that's like we really need to like look at the mirror and fix this.
Yeah, if you're repeating the patterns of past losses, like that's a terrible feeling and something that absolutely needs to be addressed.
That makes so much sense and is really interesting. So I think this brings me to my Olipop gut check of the week, actually, Becky. When does a losing streak really become a streak and not just a bad couple of games? Is it 2 games? Is it 3 games? And then what about a win streak? When does that really become like we're on a roll here?
I think that really depends on the league. And with the NWSL, I mean, we call it the Chaos League because on any given day, any team can beat any other team.
Yeah.
So for a win streak or a lose streak, I would probably say like 3 games. And even with Portland, like this franchise that historically has been very successful, we just hit our record this season with 6 wins. And when you think about that, like that's kind of wild. This organization has been around from the beginning, and the most we've ever won in a row is 6. Like it and then you look at Orlando and it's just like, wow. So I would probably say 3.
3 qualifies a streak.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's also when you think about games in terms of points, it's super interesting because you look at the points that are separating even those teams around that playoff line. 3 wins in a row is 9 points. That's going to like catapult you up. And to get all of that movement and all of that good feeling all in a row, I think is so, so valuable. And likewise, Becky, 3 losses in a row would feel really crappy to then see all these teams jump above you. So I think the number is 3. I want to hear everybody's comments. How many games is a streak? We want to know your take, unless you're an Orlando fan, in which case don't rub it in everybody's face. Thank you to Olipop for the Olipop gut check of the week. We love you so much. Let's take a quick look at some of the top lines from the games this weekend. So Orlando, all hail, beat Gotham 2-0, but it could have easily been 5-0, honestly, with all the close chances that Orlando had. Becky, is this kind of a panic button for Gotham? The fact that Orlando seems so far ahead of them in this game? Or is it kind of just, this isn't a streak, it's just one game. Do they just need to get back to what they do, keeping their forms, start over?
Yeah, so we had played Gotham the week prior, and I thought when I was playing them and afterwards, like when I was dissecting the game, that Gotham is a very strong, disciplined team, and they weren't even playing all their Olympians that had come back. And so for me, like their result against Orlando, who, come on, it's Orlando, I would not hit the panic button yet. I think it's just, okay, we got some things to learn from this match, and then let's just apply it and like stay true to the course.
Yeah, Gotham has been an interesting one for me. Obviously, Orlando is so hard to play against and so hard to beat, but I feel like their consistency was really building. And so I would love to see them kind of get back to that and just highlighting the incredible players that they do have, but doing that a little bit more consistently. Another game I wanted to mention was your game, Becky. Bay FC has brought in Scrabbers D, Abby Dahlkemper, who we've both played with a ton in our career. Abby Dahlkemper scored in her first match for her first NWSL match for her hometown club. I'm sorry that it was against you, Becky, but I was really excited for Scrappers. Bay have talent, but they haven't been finding consistent wins this year. So my question to you is, what does a veteran defender like Abby bring to the table for them?
I think with Abs, it's just a sense of composure and experience.
Yeah.
And in our match, her ability just to kind of find the right pass and basically play to the strengths of the people around her, I thought really helped Bay gain momentum in the match. And her ability, we all know her long-range passing is some of the best in the world. So she just can open up things. So she's almost kind of like this key that can unlock Bay's potential, I think. And I think we saw a glimpse of that in the Portland match.
That's a really, really good point. I think Bay have signed some really incredible attacking players like Rachel Kundananji and Asisat Oshwala, and they actually haven't been as big of goal-scoring threats as people might have expected. And maybe that's starting from further back on the field and having Abby Dahlkemper start play, execute these long-range passes, maybe spring them in behind sometimes, maybe be able to play through the midfield a little bit better. That could actually, and has maybe in this one game, given more opportunities to the forwards and unlocked the attack for Bay FC. They have now won 5 of their last 9 games and find themselves in 8th, which is in playoff contention. So this was a big move, and I'm excited for Abby. She's also been reunited with my former UCLA teammates, Caprice Didasco and Caitlin Rowland, so it's been really fun for me to see them all back together. Another game I want to mention, San Diego snatched a draw from the Spirit with a goal and an own goal by Kristen McNabb. I watched those highlights again this morning and I just could not believe the own goal. I felt so bad for them and for Kristen, but she got it back and scored. Does an own goal and a goal like kind of cancel each other out, Becky, do you think?
Oh, I have no idea. I have no idea. I have yet to do those two things together. So I'm not quite sure how it feels for Kristen McNabb, but I mean, good on her for finding the goal. Because I mean, you can definitely find yourself in a bad place with an own goal. And so to then play the rest of the game and to find yourself scoring a goal, like that is pretty cool.
Yeah, I was happy that she got it back. The Spirit definitely had the upper hand in this game. Trinity Rodman looked dangerous. Ule Sarr looked dangerous as always. And then the Spirit's new signing, Lacey Santos, looked really dangerous. They just couldn't find the net more. Landon Donovan's first two results as head coach of the San Diego Wave in the league, a loss and a draw. Is the jury still out here on Landon Donovan as head coach?
I mean, getting a new coach is not necessarily a cure-all. I think for some teams, you get that injection of energy and they start winning some matches and it's like, oh my gosh, it's this new coach. And then sometimes it's just not. And so some issues with teams just take a little bit more time. And so I think we don't have enough information to...
More data.
We need more data.
We need more data. One other team I have to bring up is Angel City, who are one of the teams on this 2-game win streak. Last weekend, Alyssa Thompson scored 2 goals. This weekend, she scored a goal. Sydney Leroux scored a goal. They won at the very last minute. Kristen Press is back playing. Can Angel City keep rising? Like I feel like they've been one of those teams since their introduction into the league that's performed a little bit under the radar of what we want and what we expect and maybe what even their ownership expects. But are the pieces maybe coming back together at the right time? And do you feel, I know you don't feel good about Angel City, but like, do you think there's a feeling of positivity, like they can keep rising?
Yeah, or that it's happening again, because this is exactly what happened last season when they found their way on a win streak getting into the playoffs. And so, I mean, we played them the last game of the regular season and we were fighting for a shield and they beat us handily. So I do think that they have the pieces to be able to go on a run like they did last year. Like why couldn't they? And I have not played them yet this season. And so I don't know what it's like to play against like the vibes that they're putting off. So I'm looking forward to doing that, to see like maybe they are on the up and up.
A very interesting one. I'm excited to watch them. Angel City, for whatever reason, is just really fun to watch. But let's talk practically here for a minute. 8 teams are going to make the playoffs this season rather than 6. Now that we've got these 2 new expansion teams, this is the first time that we'll have an 8-team playoff in the NWSL. There are also 8 games remaining in the season, and that's a possible 24-point swing. 8 times 3 is 24. Remember last season's bottom playoff slot, Gotham had come in 6th, and they went on to win the championship. So are teams looking out at the horizon at this point? Is it about getting into that 8th place position? Is it about loss management? Is it about, like, are teams thinking ahead to playoffs, or are they focusing on one game at a time? Becky, what's your thought on future thinking?
Oh, if you're thinking about loss management, then you're probably not going to make the playoffs. Like, you have to be thinking you need to get points on the board. And like you said, 8 games, 24 potential points, that completely changes the entire picture. And so you shouldn't be looking towards the future. You should be handling the weekly games and being like, we need to get points and points on the board. So
there's no sense of like, even if you go to Providence Park or North Carolina, a really difficult place to play, and you're playing away, there's no like, let's just get a tie and get the 1 point and get out of here. Like, teams need max 3 points always.
I mean, you have to be super smart. I think if you are eking out a tie and you're just giving up quality chance after quality chance, maybe like you shore it up and you get the point on the road. Because I think going to places like North Carolina, like a point on the road there, that's pretty dang good. So I think it's really based off the game, but I don't think you should ever be entering a game being like, oh, I hope we get a point out of this.
Fair enough. Well, I'm excited to see who continues their win streaks. I don't know about losing streaks, but win streaks are a lot of fun. So if you haven't read the news, the NWSL had a huge CBA renegotiation with some major changes, including eliminating the draft. There's revenue sharing now. There's unrestricted free agency. There's a ton of great articles and podcasts about it so far already, but I figured none of those have had the people's captain, Becky Sauerbrunn. So, Becky, I want to start by asking you, as a current active player, what were the players' initial reactions to this new deal getting signed?
I think my initial reaction was, oh my gosh, we did it. And I think having complete free agency is so amazing. And I will say, like, the whole process of reopening the negotiations, I was a little bit like, why does the NWSL want to do this? What are they trying to get out of it? And very immediately, our PA put us at ease and was just like, guys, we don't have to negotiate at all. Like, if we're not going to get anything great out of this, like, we can just close shop and be like, no, we're going to see this agreement out through 26 and then do negotiations then. And so what I love about this agreement is that the things that we already had in the CBA, they're now enhanced or even better. And Sammy, the thoroughness of this agreement, when they were educating us before the ratification process on everything that we got, it's truly amazing. Like, they thought of everything. And I think with, doing CBAs, I think Sammy, that what we want is like player welfare to make sure that every player is taken care of and basically get the most money to the most players as possible.
Yeah.
And I do think that this agreement does that.
That is so incredible to hear. So big picture, some of these like huge changes and things that the PA thought about and got: no college draft, no expansion draft, unrestricted free agency at the end of contracts. There is revenue sharing tied to the salary cap, meaning that if the league does well, the players do well. And then hugely, and this is something we're going to ask Tori about really specifically, there's no trades without player consent. And this is like a tectonic shift in American sports, but it's actually a lot more aligned with the global standard and soccer model. It feels really revolutionary to us here. Like, eliminating the draft is something, like, we're so used to American professional sports leagues having a draft. But in fact, these changes are really just enabling the NWSL to compete with clubs from around the world even more in terms of some of these being like standards and norms in the global market. It's always felt, I think, really ridiculous to foreign players that you don't ever get to choose your club. Like, in my experience, I got drafted out of college. Then that team moved. Somebody always has your rights, even if you go overseas, even if you're out of contract. Like, somebody still was holding on to your rights. So many players never got to decide anything about their own careers. Did it feel this way to you, Becky, that your rights were a little bit out of your control all the time?
Oh yeah, very much so. And thinking back to like FCKC and when that club dissolved, all the confusion around, like, would it be a dispersal draft, an expansion draft?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who has my rights? Can I go to where I want to go? Absolutely no, I can't go where I want to go. Like, there was just such confusion and uncertainty around these things. And it caused the players to be just so anxious because it's really like you have no say over where you play. And it's not like we're making walk away money either. And so it's just like you don't have the community around you. Like, you can't even choose where you want to live or if you want to be near family or loved ones. And so this is like, it's monumental having that player leverage and being able to kind of choose your own destiny.
Yeah, Becky, I hear you. And all these things are something that I want to talk to Tori about. So we're about to be joined again by Tori Huster, NWSLPA President, former player in the NWSL. Tori played for the Washington Spirit for 11 years. We're going to talk to her about the pros and cons of this deal and what it was like for the PA in bargaining. Here she is, Tori Huster. Welcome to Good Vibes. First of all, Tori, welcome to the women's game. Congratulations on the new CBA. It's such a huge accomplishment for the NWSLPA and all of the players. Tell us just a little bit about negotiating this new CBA. What was the NWSLPA's goal going into it?
The goal was to honestly get the best deal that we could. I think in terms of voluntary bargaining, both sides knew we didn't need to do it right now when we're midterm. And I think that was kind of the best way to go into negotiating too. It totally took the pressure off. And I think we were kind of like, let's see what this looks like. And if it's not a great deal, we can see you in 26. That was kind of our mindset.
Becky and I have both been through this with the U.S. Women's National Team PA, learning how to bargain, learning what it feels like to be in the room with all of the suits on the other side and having these conversations, trying to communicate that back to the team. I think in our experience, Becky, it was like learning by doing. Like, it's not like we went into a bargaining session or a negotiation having had all of this previous experience. That's partly why having a staff and lawyers on your side are so important. But as a former player, Tori, for these players who are currently playing in the league this year and now entering into all of these bargaining sessions and a negotiation, what does it feel like for the players behind closed doors to be like talking to Jessica Berman, the commissioner of the league, all these people on the other side?
I joke with Megan Burke, our executive director, all the time that I have an unofficial law degree. The amount of legal documents that I have seen over the last, I mean, even from our 2022 collective bargaining agreement, it's very interesting. I'm Googling things as we're talking to our labor council. It's totally, it's an education by doing. Exactly. It's like, I feel like I have a degree in some aspects, but I think what I've kept in mind and tried to pass on to players that want to engage, but they're a little, maybe nervous that they don't have the level of education that's necessary. They do. They completely have that education because they're living this experience. And you guys know, like, the opposite side of the table, more often than not, and in this negotiation as well, I think we had Allie Wagner across the table from us. Things have evolved. The game has evolved since when she played. But we have the education that's necessary to put a contract in place. We just need somebody that can give us that guidance for how to put it on paper. But all of the knowledge is there. You know it. You know it like the back of your hand. You've lived and breathed it since you were probably 4 years old. So
can you give us like some of the highlights of this new CBA? Because it truly is groundbreaking.
I think the highlights are the headlines: free agency for all, guaranteed contracts, no trades without player consent starting in 2025. I mean, the free agency window opened yesterday, and we have a long list of players who will be able to pick and choose where they'd like to go. Those are the headlines. And then there's some other things. I was just thinking about it this morning, like before I come on the podcast, what is the highlight? And I think, honestly, some of the things that we've done for the mothers in our league have been phenomenal. We've also have player benefits that, players who want to get pregnant or start building a family, that you don't have to choose, between being a mother or a parent and being a professional soccer player, that there are some things in place like that. And then even some highlights for me are guardrails around workload and, charter flights, just some of those little kickers. As I go through the contract every single time, I'm like, oh, wow, we got that, and we got that, and we got that. There's a lot in it, and I'm excited for the complete document to actually go public.
I have been really curious. So I spoke with Amanda Vandervoort, the president of the new USL Super League that just started up a couple of weeks ago. The Super League is it's fully professional women's soccer league in the US. And something I was really curious when I was talking to Amanda was, how much will the introduction of this new league kind of push the NWSL to continue to improve standards and make some of these major changes that are really player first? I think the USL, for example, the Super League doesn't have a draft. So it introduces this idea that players really get to choose where they want to play. Do you think that the rise of the Super League had an impact on the NWSL kind of being incentivized to make some of these changes? Like, did the Super League force the NWSL's hand?
Possibly. I think from the other side of the table, maybe there was more incentive because they're trying to stay ahead. But I think when I look at it, I think players want to play in the NWSL. This is the top flight of professional soccer. It's the best league in the world. I'm sure both of you would agree with that. But I think the global standards of free agency and all of that, we've been fighting for as long as I can remember. Those things have been in place for 30 years across the world. And it was just the right time to get those things in place. And, we heard at the beginning of the formation of the league, stability, we need sustainability, all of that. And it was just the right time for these things to be put in place. And the USL, it was created at the same time. I will say that they didn't have to eliminate any draft. They came in without one. And I think it is monumental for a pro league in America to actually have one and then get rid of it, effective immediately.
When you guys were educating all of us on this new agreement, I was one of those players that was kind of hesitant about the length of the agreement because the women's game is just skyrocketing the popularity, this league. And I was so put at ease by kind of the triggers that you have within the agreement that the revenue sharing, or should we reach certain metrics that we can renegotiate certain things? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. That was my hesitance too. I know I'm recently retired, so I'm not actually a player in the league, but even thinking about former teammates or friends of mine signing a deal like this for an extension of what would have been an extra 4 years and going to 2030, I'm like, wow, what are we doing here? Like, is this smart? And that was where we wanted to put in workload management guardrails. We wanted to make sure that from back-to-back weeks, you wouldn't be able to play midweek games without some type of, again, workload management, but then also, like you've said, revenue sharing, making sure that as the league grows, that the players can participate in the success of the league and that there's enough money in the system for players across the spectrum, that we were taking care of the minimum salary players, making sure that everybody's experience in NWSL was positive, but also those mid to top earners had the ability to take part in the success and also push the bar a little bit more. That's where revenue sharing comes into play. That's where in certain years of the contract, if we reach a certain amount of money based on sponsorship and broadcast and just making sure that the women's game is continuing to push forward, that the players have the ability to have some say in where this goes.
That I find that so interesting, Tori. Something you mentioned in there was this consideration around like mid to top earners. When Becky and I were doing this, negotiating a CBA for the national team and going through our equal pay lawsuit, like that was always one of the hardest parts, was how will this specific change affect the top 10 players who will go into every camp and be on every roster in the NWSL that looks like starters, high earners? And then how will this change affect kind of that bottom tier of player, the players who are maybe towards the end of rosters, maybe not making every game roster, maybe not traveling, maybe in that kind of minimum salary. And I think that breadth of having to think about each change will affect those groups of players differently is such a hard and considerable thing to have to do. The two main things that I want to still ask you about specifically are the elimination of the draft and then the no trades without consent. And so with the draft first, you had this quote in Vanity Fair that got pulled out that said, the draft is something that's celebrated and it's something that we hate. I feel like people on the outside might not understand, why is the draft not good for players? And now with the elimination of both the college draft and the expansion draft, how will these new expansion teams who are coming into the league in 2026 fill up their rosters? Can you just explain those two elements of the draft elimination to us?
Yes. So the draft elimination is basically, it came about, well, global standard again. There's not drafts in other countries. So there's a barrier to entry for players that are international and they're looking to come and play in our league. And so we wanted to eliminate that because we want the top talent here. But then for everybody else that's experiencing the NWSL, and you look across the board at American professional sports, the draft is something where there's money thrown behind it. It's like all over TV. There's so much to it. And it effectively is the buying and selling of players or humans. And yeah, Megan and I have said that, and it's difficult to hear that, but it's something that it's uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortable for the players. And I think that we need to get beyond the idea that these players shouldn't have some say in where they end up. Particularly college players, they should be watching games. They should be, making decisions, and sophisticated decisions at that. They should be doing their homework, doing their research, potentially getting an agent to help them make these decisions, but really taking a look at who they are as players and what they may want to be able to do in their professional career, and then see what opportunities are out there for them. I think when you talk about the expansion draft, there's going to be a list of players, again, that are free agents. So expansion teams will have the ability to, see who's available at that point. And then there's going to be players that are, maybe not getting enough playing time in a club and they're willing to make a move. And that's where the consent comes in place. So maybe a trade at that point makes sense. But I think the number of drafts that I've been through, expansion draft, college draft, supplemental draft, whatever it is. I think the expansion draft was the most uncomfortable for me because you have this list of protected players and then unprotected players. And realistically, you may lose one or two players from your roster, but being protected versus unprotected, what does that say, to the players that are on your roster if you're the GM or you're the club? What does that say to the players who are unprotected about their value in your club? And I think that's something that we don't need. Everybody has value, whether they are, again, the top earners or they are more of your reserve players, practice players. They're still there and they're still affording your team the ability to field 11 players or play, 11v11 at practice. There's still value there. And I think with the elimination of the draft, players will recognize their value even more, and they won't have it front and center that they're unprotected players and they don't have any worth at your club. That's my feeling on it, and I'm glad it's eliminated.
Hear, hear.
Okay, Tori, I really want to get into the no trades without consent. Obviously, this is unusual in professional sports to give players this kind of power and say over wanting to stay or go from a club that they may have a signed contract with. But I've heard players talk about this. I've heard you talk about this, Tori. In the NWSL, some of our players make significantly less money than other professional sports leagues in the U.S. So no trades without consent feels like a real win for these players who, I think, rely on our community ties and sense of stability in a location. Tori, you mentioned mothers earlier in this. Maybe their kids are enrolled in school, or maybe the players are doing one-on-one sessions with young players that they know in the area, family, friends, have a side job. They might just rely on their community relationships a lot more for some sense of stability that their salaries don't necessarily provide. And I do want to ask Tori, from the league's perspective, how hard was this for them to give up, like business-wise? Can you just talk about their consideration? Will this handcuff teams to players who might not fit into their plans?
These player rights issues were probably, I'll just say, a lot easier to come by than I had anticipated. Free agency trades without consent, or you're only allowed to trade with consent,
right?
Guaranteed contracts. Because it's the global standard, I think that the league... And we made a case for it. Like, don't get me wrong. We made a case for why this was necessary. And I think our case was so well heard that it, in turn was easier to come by than I thought it was going to be a dogfight till the end. And with 10 months of negotiating, I would say it was probably the player rights issues were probably the things that we were able to agree upon at the beginning, like first 3-5 months. I don't think it will necessarily handcuff people. It'll just cause them to make better decisions. And I think that's on the player side and it's on the club side as well. And there's things that change in players' lives as well. So if someone wants to be closer to home, then they have the right to voice that and to potentially make a move closer to home. If a club needs to make a change, then they have to have a conversation with the player. Before they could do it at any point, and now they need to have that conversation. I think what I will still draw attention to, though, is that even in the likes of the NBA and the NFL, even though players are making lots of money, to uproot somebody and to uproot their families is still very difficult. And you hear it all the time. I think, when Drew and Lauren had to make the change up to Boston, like it's still hard. And it's still with the loyalties that players give to their club and their heart and their soul, like throwing it all on the line for these teams and the community and the communities that we build and the love and, everything that players are able to create in these markets. To have that kind of ripped away, some would say that's business, but honestly, like that's bad business. It's not easy for the fans. It's not easy for the players. And I honestly just think that they need to have a voice in that decision.
Totally agree. And kind of just speaking to that, and this is our last question for you, Tori, and then we can let you go. There are some states where we have NWSL teams that have limited access to reproductive rights. So there's this clause in this new CBA about players not being able to get traded without their consent. And I'm wondering if part of the reason for this clause had those markets in mind. Can can we trade a player to a state against their will where there is limited access to reproductive rights? So I'm curious if the PA had that in mind when they put this clause forward. And then maybe secondary to that question is, will those clubs in those states be impacted more so by this clause than maybe clubs in states that have full access to reproductive rights?
It's a great question, and it's a serious issue, and it's one that we're considering. It's questions that Megan and I are asking. I think even in terms of expansion, we have an expansion bid process going for this next team in 26. That's important. It's important to be able to protect the health and safety of players. That's the pillar of what we do. You all know that. We need to stay vigilant on that and need to make sure that regardless of where players are, that they're receiving the health care that they need. So yes, any player is able to get in touch with us if they're having issues. But in terms of the decisions, it's definitely a question that we are considering. It's an issue that we have to take seriously. And for whoever comes into our league, even international players, like they need to know that they will be supported however necessary.
Tori, thank you so much for joining us. That was so awesome. I'm so glad that we could have you on. Thank you so much again to Tori Huster for joining us. That was such an awesome conversation. I'm so glad that we could do that here on Good Vibes. Before we let everybody go, let's go to the inbox. We got an email from Darcy that asks, "Hi, Sam, Lynn, and Becky. Absolutely loving the show. Thank you for bringing a smile to my face each week. I have a question inspired from TikTok. If the three of you were together in person and an identical clone of each of you also showed up, what would you get them to do or ask them to prove who was the actual Sam, Lynn, or Becky?" Side note here from Darcy, clones have the same appearance, voice, singing, and athletic ability as the person who they are impersonating. For example, I would prove I'm not a clone of myself, as my friends know I can sing the alphabet backwards, thanks to a year 5 school camp. Thanks again for a fantastic show. Darcy from Melbourne, Australia, thank you so much for writing in. Okay, Becky, we're all together. There's 6 of us, apparently. How are you going to prove yourself, or how are you going to prove who me and Lynn are?
Oh, this is such a fun question. Okay, so Sammy, for you, and I can't even say the joke on the show because this is a family-friendly show, but I would ask you, Sammy, at Morgan Cottrell's wedding, in the back of a shuttle, what did you say that almost had the shuttle driver off-roading? You said something so hilarious. I have never cackled.
I don't know.
So hard in my
I'm
life.
hot.
And so I would ask you or your clone that question because it is burned into my brain and I still giggle about it to this day.
Wait, but I don't even know the answer. So how do we know that I'm not a clone right now?
If I told you, I think you would remember. I mean, we both had some adult bevies. Maybe you more than most.
Me?
Yeah. And I can tell you offline, but it was, to this day, Zola and I will still laugh about it.
Oh my God. You need to tell me. I think I would prove to you who I was by saying the thing about Pat and the socks.
Oh.
But that's also not a story I'm willing to share publicly.
Okay, let's go a little bit more PG then. For me, it would probably be like, I have a very specific coffee order.
Oh, yeah.
How many shots do I take in my iced latte?
I want to say 4, but that sounds crazy.
Nope, you're wrong. The clones are going to take
3.
over. It's 3, yeah. I think for Lynn, I would be like, "Hi, here's a gold medal. How would you break this?" And if she didn't immediately hammer throw it, we would know that she's not the real Lynn.
That is literally such a good one. I think for both of you, I would go in really aggressively for a hug and try to read your reaction. Because I just feel, again, I know that you'd rather not hug. So usually I don't force you to hug.
I love hugs.
What?
Okay, I feel like we don't know each other at all. I love hugs. Just because I don't initiate hugs doesn't mean I don't love receiving hugs.
I'm so rattled. I actually feel like I don't know you at all. Me and Lynn pretty decidedly don't hug. So I feel like with Lynn, I would go in aggressively for a hug and try to be is she a little bit freaked out by this?
Another one that you could do would be, hey, do you want to share this drink with me? And you know that I'd be like, absolutely
No.
not.
Yeah, that is a good one.
God,
Dang,
Sam,
Becky.
we need to work on our friendship.
Clearly. You know what else I could do is I do know that you love sleeping. And so I could suggest that we do something early in the morning.
I just see my reaction of being like, well, are you sure we can't do it at 10?
I literally love this question. I might carry this over to next week and ask Lynn the same thing because it's a really good one. Wait, Becky, how would you differentiate if Zola was a clone?
Oh, I'd probably ask him to smell something because his mannerism when he smells something is so weird. Like he does this thing with his like hand and he puts it real close to his I know. It like grosses me out, but it's so I've never seen anyone smell something like he does. So that's probably what I would ask him to do.
Oh my God, that is really funny. I'm trying to think about with Pat. I would probably have him cook something and I feel like I'd know right away.
If it was bad?
Yeah, or like I just, like you just kind of know what somebody else's food tastes like.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
All right, anyway, that was a really fun question, Darcy. Thank you so much for writing in. Maybe we need to invent a Good Vibes secret handshake so we know who the clones are.
Oh, I like that. I've never really had a handshake.
I know. I'm now doing something weird with my hands to try to think about what it would be.
Oh, we'll work on it offline.
We'll work on it offline. Don't forget, write us in with questions. I already told you I need them to be quirky questions, quirky cues. Send me an email, womensgamemib@menandblazers.com, and I will bring them to Becky and Lynn, and we will answer them on the podcast. All right. Sadly, Becky, this has been such a great episode, but this is the end of the episode. Do you have a good vibe this week that you want to leave our lovely, lovely listeners with?
Yeah, so I was in the locker room and I sit next to Megan Klingenberg, and you know that she's just like kind of my person. And we were just like vibing and laughing and having such a great time. And I was just thinking like, this is such a vibe and so lovely. And so really the vibe for me for this week is just sitting with one of your people and just vibing out.
That is such a great good vibe. It's kind of like what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
My good vibe is not really a good vibe, but I have a podcast recommendation for everybody.
Oh, do tell.
So I had listened to this podcast called The Retrievals, and it was like kind of like a medical storytelling, like really great podcast. And I Googled a podcast like The Retrievals. I just wanted like a good story that would like hook you. So Pat and I drove back to Boston, back and forth this weekend to Vermont. And so we listened to this podcast in the car. It's called Sold a Story. And it's about our like education system and teaching kids how to read and how this like curriculum of reading that is ineffective got popularized and became like a huge issue in schools with kids in kindergarten and first grade using not scientifically backed research to read, and it didn't work. And it was like been a really like bad thing for our like education system. It's called Sold a Story. It's 6 episodes. It's really, really good. Really interesting, even though I might have made it sound not that interesting, but I wanted to recommend it to everybody.
Well, Sammy, you recommended Serial to me, which like started my love for podcasts.
Oh my God, I'm so proud of that.
So whatever you recommend, I will listen to.
I think you'll like this one, Becky. It's very good. I recommend it. Sold a Story. That's my good vibe. Weird one. But that's it for this week's episode of Good Vibes FC. I really hope that you are subscribed to this podcast feed. If not, you can subscribe right now, you little cranberry crumble. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you can also turn on those little notifications so you get an alert every time we post something new. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Threads, literally anywhere and everywhere you can find at Women's Game MIB. Please follow along. You won't miss any of our content, including our interview next week that we have with Gotham's Anne Katrine Berger. We talk about her penalty kick masterclass at the Olympics. She's survived thyroid cancer multiple times. We talk about her transition to Gotham. It was such a lovely interview. I got to do it in person when I was in New York. So I'm really excited for everybody to get to see that on Thursday. All right, everybody. That's all. Goodbye.
I'm Becky Sauerbrunn.
And I'm Sam Mewis, and this is Good Vibes FC. Okay, love you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.